Good afternoon and welcome to Zagat Guest Chefs at Google. My name is Jason Crane and it's my pleasure to welcome Laura Werlin here today. Laura Werlin is the James Beard Foundation award-winning author of 6 books on cheese. She is a sought-after speaker at food and wine events across the country and is a champion of all things American cheese. Laura is a frequent teacher at the Cheese School of San Francisco, a local and national television and radio guest, a freelance writer for several publications including Food and Wine magazine, and a widely passionate educator about the basics of cheese and wine pairing. So thank you very much for coming today, Laura. I appreciate having you.
Oh, I appreciate being here. Thank you.
You want to give us a little bit of your background and then we'll...
Yeah, well, so as you said, I've written 6 books about cheese, and prior to that, actually, I wasn't in cheese at all. I was in TV news. I wasn't on camera, I was behind the scenes, but I always loved food, and I always wrote about it on the side. So I would take trips, and I would say, today we saw the Eiffel Tower, and that'd be like one little paragraph, and 15 pages later is what we ate. So I decided that I wanted to go into food writing, and then not long after that, I wanted to write about cheese because it was something that I loved, and also specifically American cheese, because what I noticed living here in Northern California, that there were these amazing cheeses being made here, and I wanted to bring attention to those. But then what I realized is that what was happening here in Northern California was happening all over the country. And I thought, I am going to write about American cheese. I need to tell the story. And I felt like we were kind of on the cusp of an evolution, or revolution really, with cheese making in this country. And that book came out 14 years ago. So in fact, that's kind of what's happened, is American cheese making has exploded.
Yeah, it really has. That kind of leads me into my first question. So 6 books on cheese. What about cheese keeps drawing you back over and over to write these cookbooks? And as we were discussing a little bit at lunch, 2 of them are on grilled cheese.
Yeah. Well, what keeps drawing me back to cheese is cheese itself. I got into it in the first place because it got into me, because I love cheese. And I always have, ever since I was just the tiniest little kid. In fact, my first memory is of a grilled cheese sandwich, my first food memory. That and Cheerios, I think. But one of the neat things about cheese is that it's not a subject you can really master. Because it's so complex. It's kind of like wine. If you love wine, you don't really tire of it. You don't tire of learning about it because there's so much to know. And cheese is the same way. And what I've learned over the years is that there are so many different kinds of cheeses, and now in the US, so many new kinds of cheeses, because there are new cheesemakers popping up everywhere and all the time. And so every time I take a bite of cheese, or every time I see cheese being made, I learn so much. And so it's never boring, and it's so fundamentally satisfying to me to eat a really great piece of cheese. So I can't imagine ever tiring of it.
Yeah, I agree 100% with you. There's I haven't met a cheese I haven't liked yet.
Right.
So.
Well, I've met a couple cheeses I haven't liked, but but as a category, right. I like cheese a lot.
Awesome. So today we were working from your Mac and Cheese Please book, and they were doing some mac and cheeses here in the cafe for the Googlers to come through and eat. And we started talking about comfort food a little bit, and I kind of wanted to get your thoughts on what you thought comfort food was, and what's specifically about mac and cheese and grilled cheese that just really fits that comfort food model.
Well, I think that comfort food is comfort food because it evokes a memory without even thinking about it. It's subconscious. So you have this just visceral response to a food that makes you think of home, whatever that is, or something really, really positive. Comfort food does not evoke a negative thought, right? Because then it's not comforting, right? And a big sort of bubbling cauldron of mac and cheese, it might not be gourmet mac and cheese. It's probably, in fact, if it evokes those memories, it's probably not that. It's probably something that was in a pot that might have even come out of a box. And grilled cheese is the same way. In both cases, both mac and cheese and grilled cheese, actually I really feel this way particularly about grilled cheese. It hits all the senses. So you've got this aroma when grilled cheese is being made, right? And then you have texture because you've got this crunchy bread and you've got this, gooey cheese. Then you also have the sort of the visual, because something is priming you when you look at that, when you see that cheese oozing and the crunchy bread and all that, you just kind of know it's going to be pretty fantastic, right? And then, of course, the aroma, did I say that? And then you've got, of course, flavor, right? So it hits just, all of those parts of ourselves that are fundamental to being human, beings. And I think, and then add to that the component of memory, which I think a lot of people have memories of both mac and cheese and grilled cheese as kids, mostly positive. And although I have to be honest, I didn't like mac and cheese as a kid. I didn't like noodles of any kind, and that changed. But so it's a positive memory, and I don't think there's any way to separate food from memory, particularly when it's positive, and there really isn't. And so that's why some people say they still prefer mac and cheese out of the box in some ways, even though they're grown-ups now and they love great cheese and all of that. It's because you can't fight with mom, or at least whatever the memory is that you have.
Exactly. As far as texture goes, I always put too much cheese in my grilled cheeses, so that...
Is there such thing?
That cheese that spills out and then gets crispy on the bottom of the pan right next to the sandwich.
Yeah.
That's one of my favorite parts of the grilled cheese.
Well, that's why I recommend when you make a grilled cheese sandwich to use a non-stick pan, because for just that reason. Because who wants to have to wash it off? You want to eat it off, right?
Right, before the sandwich is even done.
Before the sandwich is done. It's a snack.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So while we're talking about the book, what recipe in the book was your favorite to eat and do the research on and cook?
Oh gosh, that's kind of akin to asking, your favorite child, right? Of course, I don't have children, so that part's easy. I don't have to choose. But with the mac and cheese, one of my favorites, I do really have a few in there, but one of my favorites is one that I call butternut squash, and what do I call it? Butternut squash and Gruyere mac and cheese. So what you do is you roast the butternut squash and then you kind of mash it and add that to the cream and cheese, and then you make a sage butter. So you take fresh sage leaves and just fry them real quickly in butter, and then all of that goes into the mac and cheese too. So it's a really, really wonderful fall dish. Plus you've got the orange color from the butternut squash, and then there are these breadcrumbs that are mixed with Parmesan on top. So you've got the crunch, and you've got the cheesiness, and you've got the visual. And it's great on a Thanksgiving table, and even though, of course, there are a few other foods on the Thanksgiving table, but it kind of almost takes the place of stuffing. Not quite, but it works really well side by side.
So cheese has come a long way in America over the last 10, 15 years since you wrote your first book on it. Can we talk a little bit about some of the changes that have happened to the cheese industry and where Americans have come in their taste for cheese?
Yeah. When I was saying before about there being a cheese revolution in America, that kind of cuts across all swaths of cheese. And so what I mean by that is that the American cheesemaker has evolved. Even what we call cheese has evolved. So when I was first writing about this, or researching it actually 15 years ago, I took myself to the annual conference of the American Cheese Society. And at the time, they have something called the Festival of Cheese, and I went around and I tasted, they had maybe 300 cheeses out, and I got to about 299 of them. That 300th jalapeno cheddar I just couldn't get to. But the point is that there were not that many cheeses, and those that were there were a lot of the flavored ones, not so fabulous cheeses. There were several that were good though. And now that same conference, it's held annually, has almost 1,800 cheeses at that same festival. So it isn't, and it isn't just a matter of quantity, it's also quality. So the cheese itself has evolved. The skill of the cheesemaker has evolved tremendously. And there's been attrition as well. So some of the cheesemakers that were doing things the same way for a generation or two. We don't have a long tradition of cheesemaking in this country, but for those who either were phased out or they had to step up to the plate and revise their cheesemaking methods that they'd been doing for 20 or 40 or 60 years, however many generations, because the American palate was evolving, and that jalapeno cheddar, not that there's anything wrong with that. I mean, there's certain flavored cheeses I really like, but it just didn't cut the mustard, as it were. And then also what we name cheeses. So if you think about the evolution of American wine drinkers in America for a long time looked down their nose at American wine. They thought, no, the real stuff comes from France, maybe Italy, and that's where they looked to get their wine. And little by little, it was clear that California wine was pretty darn good. And of course, we now know that that's well established. But in addition to looking into within our own borders for wine, the winemakers here started naming their wines. Originally they were, Burgundy and Chablis, right? Which those are regions in France, and they mean nothing to us. So the American winemakers started calling their wines Chardonnay and Pinot Noir after the grape with which it was made. So originally, American cheesemakers were naming their cheeses after some sort of loose recipe they were making based on an old world cheese like Gruyere or something. The problem was that the American consumer would eat that so-called Gruyere, and it tasted nothing like the Swiss version. So little by little, American cheesemakers realized that they were doing themselves no service by naming their cheeses after the old world versions that, to which theirs was, not even similar. So now they name them, anything like after the lane on which they live or the creek nearby or whatever it is, which is slightly confusing for the American consumer because it's hard to remember. By the same token, it distinguishes those cheesemakers as it should, and it also changes the consumer's expectation of what that cheese is. If they read that it's, my farm's cheese, they're not going to try to fit it into any box, of the cheese they've had previously that might be similar. They just accept it, on its face. And so that's been a really big change in terms of American cheesemaking. And the other thing is that American cheesemakers are not bound by tradition. Good news, bad news. So what that means is that we have had to learn, I'm not a cheesemaker, but collectively have had to learn skills that were not passed down, the way they have been for hundreds of years in the old world. And that's the good news and the bad news. So in a way, they're inventing the wheel here, and which is good, but there's a big learning curve. But on the other hand, they come up with these, recipes that no old world, traditional cheesemaker who is bound by tradition would ever even think to make. So we're the really kind of, those of us that love cheese are the lucky beneficiaries of that.
So while we're talking about all these types of cheese, there are so many that can be really intimidating. And you were just talking a little bit about this with, it's not, a lot of it's not grounded. We don't know, we know our cheddar, we know our Swiss, but what is Redwood Hill Camellia? There's no connection to anything real in that. And and how do we as consumers and eaters, get over some of that intimidation?
Well, part of it is just to be brave. Be brave with your cheese. It won't bite back. Well, most of the time anyway. That stuff that's sitting in the back of your refrigerator that has green mold on it, maybe not. But the rest of it. So really, it really is about getting it in your mouth, tasting it. And what that requires is going to a store, it can be Whole Foods or it can be a cheese shop where they're willing to give you samples. Beyond that, though, I did write a book called Cheese Essentials, and in that, what I talk about are the styles of cheese. So familiarizing yourself with styles. What does that mean? A fresh cheese. So that can be, ricotta or fresh goat cheese or something like that. If you know the basic characteristics of a fresh cheese, then you can look in the case and say, okay, I think I know that this is going to be, not too salty. It's going to be a little bit tangy. It's going to be a little like milk-like, the milk from which it came. A soft ripened cheese, another word really, a fancy description for brie. So that's the kind that has the white bloomy rind. If you know you like brie, next time you go to the store, don't buy brie. Buy a cheese that looks like brie. And expand your horizons, because chances are it's not going to be so very different from that brie that you like. And the worst case scenario is that it isn't as good as the one that you like, so then at least you've, branched out a little bit.
A frame of reference for the next cheese you try.
Exactly. I also recommend trying cheeses side by side, the same style. So buy 3 blue cheeses if you like blue cheese. Of course, don't do it if you don't, but, or 3 cheddars. And you can recognize the difference in flavor, in texture, and see what appeals to you. And the more you do that, the more familiar you're going to become with those styles. And what that means is that you can go to Paris and go to a cheese shop there, and you can look and say, hey, that's a soft ripened cheese. I know that because I can just look at that white so-called bloomy rind. And I don't care that I don't read French or that I don't know that producer. I'm going to try that. And it's important to know the milk source, to know that if you do or don't like goat's milk, for instance. But beyond that, once you learn those styles, or conversely, a style that a lot of people have either an attraction or an avoidance to, is called a washed rind cheese. So that has the orangish kind of rind, kind of sticky, and they're very creamy. So a cheese like Taleggio or Epoisse from France, or Red Hawk from Cowgirl Creamery here in California, they will stink up your refrigerator almost instantaneously. And they kind of are counterintuitive. You think, why would I eat something that smells like old gym socks? But in fact, if you like that style of cheese, they're really good, and I do too. But if you don't, that's an entire section of the cheese store that you can just say, don't want to go there. And so once you know that that's the style, then you can go or not go, depending on that.
Okay.
And that's, so it's really about learning styles and not, yes, cheeses vary within styles. So a semi-hard category of cheeses, you've got cheddar and you've got Gruyere and you've got Emmentaler, like the quintessential sort of Swiss cheese. You've got, those are very different from each other. But some of the characteristics are similar. They melt well. And really the only way to know, though, is to taste.
Yeah. So just be adventurous and get out there and keep trying.
And like I say, don't be intimidated, because I do understand people's reluctance, because this is, it can be a strong smelling food. And but I just think that people should be a little bit braver, and because most cheeses really aren't going to be as strong as they smell, no matter what. And I think that people are going to be pleasantly surprised more times than not.
What are some uses for cheeses that we might not have thought about that someone who's done all this research can?
Well, one of the things about cheese is it is very versatile. Obviously, there are the things that we have thought about, those that we've talked about today, and we all know, on top of a pizza. In fact, more cheese is sold in this country than any other. More mozzarella, because it lands on top of the pizza. But and there's nothing wrong with that, by the way. Although I like burrata, mix it up a little. Anyway, but you can make ice cream. I recently had brie ice cream. I did not make it, but I had it. And did I love it? No. But it just goes to show that cheese is versatile. And other people at my table loved it. And I thought, all right, well, whatever. And but cheese and chocolate are really, really, really compatible. And blue cheese in particular, and dark chocolate. Add a little candied ginger, and you've got this confection that is just this dessert that's like a cheese course, but it's a dessert course. It's all in one. And so people might not think so much of pairing cheese and chocolate. I've met many people along the way that love cheese and they love chocolate, but they haven't necessarily thought of putting them together. But you should. And part of it, if you think about eating trends right now, particularly chocolate or desserts in general, there's a lot of salt now that we find, salted caramel, salted chocolate, and so why not cheese? Because that's got that savory, salty component. Or a smoked cheese and chocolate. So sometimes you'll see smoked salt on chocolate. Same idea, but you've got texture going on there too. So beyond that, I don't know. I suppose you could use certain cheeses to like plug a hole or something in your sink. I don't know. No. I don't know what else I would use cheese for other than mostly the obvious. I don't know. Can you think of anything?
You nailed a couple of good ones there, but Usually cheese doesn't make it much past the knife that I cut it off the block with. I mean, that's usually most of the time. You know, if it makes it onto a nice everything cracker, you know, I'm like, that's double bonus round.
Or
for me.
Right. Or if it's a creamy cheese, it doesn't even get onto a cracker; it just stays on my spoon.
Yeah.
But and I do use a spoon, not a knife, when it's a creamy cheese. But you know, that is another thing, though. I think sometimes we overthink how cheese should be used here, because because it is something that we celebrate and something that we revere. Really, I think sometimes we overthink it, and then that's part of the intimidation factor. So, you know, I think, like, I actually taught a class last night, and somebody was asking me when to serve cheese, before dinner, after dinner. And,
both?
Well, yeah, or both, right. Well, there is a place for it at both ends of the meal. And what I found is that you just don't want to overwhelm people with, I mean, what happens is if you serve it beforehand, people go crazy with it, right? For one, that's when they're hungriest. But two, it's always exciting to have a selection of cheeses. So, and then you eat dinner, and then you have cheese again, maybe, and then you're full, and everybody blames the cheese. Well, I'm sorry, what about those short ribs and that Caesar salad and everything else you ate, you know? But, so what I try to do is I might have one cheese after dinner, but it's a cheese that I've really sought out, I think is really special. And then I'll put an accompaniment with it that I think is really complimentary. And there might be a dessert wine, or it might be the wine that was with the main course at dinner that we just carry over, whatever it might be. So that's, having one cheese after dinner is, I think, a different use for cheese than most people think of. But I will tell you, having done this more than once, when people, if they call you the next day to thank you for the dinner party, which hopefully they've done, then they will always say, "Oh my God, what was that cheese?" Not, "Wow, the whole rest of the meal that you made, that you spent hours or days making, was so fabulous. I love the cheese you bought." You know, I'm like, thanks. But you know, so really, that's a way to make cheese special. And you're not investing everything that your life savings in it either. And that's also a really great way to go.
Yeah, it's a great idea. My wife's a pastry chef, and there's always that, whenever there's a cheese course available, I'd rather have cheese for dessert than, actual dessert most of the time.
A lot of people would. And you know what, it's also a helpful thing as people go gluten-free more and more. So many desserts have gluten in some way, shape, or form. So, and also for diabetics too, cheese is a wonderful alternative. And I've found that over the years that people that have health reasons for not eating, sweets, just love the fact that the cheese course is finally making its way onto the American table.
So let's talk a little bit about actually getting in and making these mac and cheeses a little bit here, and some of the technical details. There's a section in your book where you kind of go through and give us a lowdown on some of the ingredients and the correct way to use them. So my first question about this is, why does the fat content in the milk you use matter so much, and what do you find is the best either milk or mixture of dairy products that really bring that sauce together? Well,
writing the mac and cheese book was definitely an exercise in indulgence. I will not kid you, but I did write a chapter called Lighten Up, Cool Down. So the rest of the book celebrates cream and whole milk and all of that. But that chapter I use skim milk for the most part, a little bit of low fat too. The issue there is it's tricky. When you have a lower fat or no fat milk, the cheese has a tendency to curdle, and you have to add the milk really slowly. You have to, and add the milk, to a flour.
To your roux, right?
Yeah, to the roux, the butter flour mixture or oil flour, olive oil. So you add the milk slowly, and you do it over a lower heat, and hopefully the cheese won't curdle. The other component, when I mentioned flour, that's crucial when you're using a lower fat or non-fat milk, because that keeps it basically keeps the proteins from matting together to curdle, and so, which in the presence of starch, that's what happens.
There's not enough fat to get in the way.
Yeah.
The whole milk fats, you have all that fat, and the cheese has fat, and they block that.
That's exactly right. So you can do it. It's just trickier to cook with. But in terms of just the voluptuousness, I think that we think of for mac and cheese, I really do like to have a full fat. You don't have to use cream. Whole milk is great. You can use, I mean, this is one of the things I learned. It's very forgiving. You can use different, a variety of milks or just one, and you're going to be okay. But I do think that there should be just a little fat in there somewhere for flavor, but also just so that your mac and cheese will work. Yeah. What else? Oh yeah. Also, of course, you want to grate the cheese. Some people believe that when you add the cheese to that bechamel, to that white sauce, that you should do it off the heat. And there are reasons for that. Although I found that I didn't really have to. I just put it in, stirred it, made it, until it melted, and then you add the cooked pasta and go from there. And whatever other ingredients.
I mean, I think that comes into if your bechamel is screaming hot, you could break the cheese.
Yes.
So, but if you're at a mid-range temperature, it doesn't really have to come off the heat. Kind of just depends on your cooking method.
That's exactly right. Yeah, and that's, and if the whole thing does break, meaning, separates and curdles, and then it's so disappointing.
Mm-hmm. It's a sad moment.
Yeah, it is a sad moment. Yeah.
Talk about the different kind of cheeses and where to use them in the mac.
Well, I was going to say also, with one of the things about mac and cheese, it's kind of and grilled cheese too. It's kind of a blank canvas. You can paint it with whatever ingredients you might have on hand, or if you're at the farmer's market and you see, broccoli, you think, how does broccoli work into mac and cheese? But, what I did, I made a broccoli, I did a riff on broccoli cheddar casserole with the mac and cheese. So instead of, you can use the canned fried onions that are typically on top,
delicious.
Right? Yeah. But I happen to provide a recipe for fried shallots. They're super simple, but you don't have to use them. But they're great. And then the broccoli and the cheddar and a little cayenne, a little spice, but all on with the macaroni, it's a great way to go. But in terms of the in terms of the cheeses that you use for mac and cheese, essentially, as with grilled cheese, essentially any cheese will work, but they work in different ways. So a very hard cheese like Parmesan, that's not going to be oozy, gooey, right? So what you use that for, or pecorino, you might mix that with some breadcrumbs and put them right on top. So you get that toasty, nutty, kind of cheesy flavor. But again, you're looking for that crunch. You're not looking for the pull. And then say you want to use brie or blue cheese. Those get creamy, but they don't get stretchy. So what I like to do is I'll put a creamy cheese like that, or goat cheese, in a mac and cheese, but then I also add a pullable cheese like a mozzarella or something, or Gruyere or whatever, something like that, because I like to have a little bit of that stretch with mac and cheese, as well as, again, grilled cheese. So really any cheese will lend itself to a mac and cheese. It just depends on the result you're looking for, okay, and of course the flavor. And and I mentioned brie in this context, that's one of those cheeses, when it has a rind like that, you want to cut that off, because that doesn't melt in the same way. It becomes like little paper pieces, which is not so great.
And just put that on a cracker,
yeah,
and just eat the rind, yeah, while you're making the cheese.
Well, I'm with you.
Yeah.
I'm glad to hear you say that, because so many people are so afraid of the rind. And I don't know about you, but I've gone to many parties where there's this wheel of brie and everybody digs out the center.
It's all dug out.
Don't do that. Just cut the whole piece that you want, put it on your napkin. You can dig it out yourself, and wrap the rest up, and I don't care, put it under your host's pillow. Just don't leave it on the table.
So the next part, and it's not really mac and cheese without the mac. Talk a little bit about pastas and the kind of pastas and sizes and shapes that lend themselves more to making a mac and cheese.
Well, what I found when I made it, so first of all, let me explain my definition of mac and cheese. Even though it's mac and cheese, in my world, it's really cheese and mac. Okay, so I want the cheese to really sing. Mm-hmm. So if you have big pasta, then it becomes a pasta dish with cheese, which there's nothing wrong with, but to me at that point it ceases to be mac and cheese. So I decided to go for smaller shapes and sizes. The largest I use is penne, which is just the ridged, little tubular cheese, which is kind of the maximum, because And that part of the reason I use that in certain recipes is because the ridges on the outside of penne are meant to absorb sauce, and I like the toothsomeness of pasta. I want that to be there. I just don't want that to be the overwhelming texture, because there's not so much about flavor but texture. And so the ratio of sauce to pasta I felt worked better with slightly smaller pasta, so that could be like the tiny or the small elbow macaroni, the traditional. In a couple of recipes I do call for the bigger one, but mostly I like the smaller. Or it might be the small shell pasta, just smaller shapes. In general, I found were the better way to go to get that cheesiness to dominate.
So we talked a little bit about the healthy chapter at the end. What do we call it?
Oh, lighten up, cool down.
Lighten up, cool down.
Yeah.
Did you have any rhyme or reason to why you named the chapters what you did? Because they were kind of fun as I was reading through, and it kind of broke the book down into some nice sections for what you were maybe looking for different uses for the mac.
Well, with that chapter, it was I conceived of it initially as a recipe for days like we're having today, where it's nearly 100 degrees, and I thought, can you have a hot day and your mac and cheese on the same day? And I felt like the easiest way to do that was to make for a lighter substance, so non-fat, low-fat milk, and in a couple cases lower fat cheese, which again is a little tricky to work with because it doesn't melt so well, or as well I should say. And so that I don't know that chapter title just came to me. Eat your veggies. Well, that to me, so here we have this sort of inherently decadent book, right? Mac and cheese, but I still want you to eat your veggies, so that's the chapter that has all vegetable, related macs and cheese. And eat your protein. That too, sure, go ahead and get your sausage, or, or I have one that's meatballs, and it's actually a riff on meatballs and spaghetti, which is what I call it, but it's in quotes. So it's meatballs and burrata and a tomato sauce in macaroni, or some sort of pasta. I can't remember which one. It's very decadent and it's very delicious. So anyway, but that's in the protein chapter. And there's a classic, and then there's an almost classic, because it was kind of a riff on the classic. So in that section, I think it's in that section I have or chapter. I have just a mac and cheese that has I think it has a little smoky paprika in it, and then I also have a grilled cheese recipe there, and that's what you use to dip to get the mac and cheese out. Decadent, oh yeah.
Absolutely.
Starchy, oh yeah. Forget about the gluten thing. If you're gluten-free, I'm sorry. Well, actually, that's not really true. You can use gluten-free bread and gluten-free pasta, and you can still
right. You just have to be a little bit more careful, and obviously if you're living that lifestyle, you know to be a little more careful with the rice pastas or the quinoa pastas that don't quite hold up as well.
Not quite as well.
To cooking as, a regular pasta.
Yeah, you just have to be careful.
Did we have any questions?
If you had to pick one cheese.
The question was, with all these great cheeses we're talking about and all the cheeses you've tried, if you had to pick one cheese to take to Desert Island with you, what cheese would that be? On the spot.
Oh my gosh. I hate to answer that question because there are so many thousands of cheeses, not only that I love. You know what, I will say, I will answer it. I'm going to dodge it, but I'll answer it at the same time. So what I find is that when a cheese is really, really, really well made, and what I mean by that, you might think, well, I know what a well-made cheese is, but you might not. What I mean by that is, I'll never forget this experience where I was eating a fresh goat cheese, a simple cheese, right? And it was made in Austin, just outside of Austin, Texas, famous cheese-making region, and not so much. And it was, and I know the cheesemaker, and she, hand pours the curds into this mold, but it was a fresh chev, or fresh goat cheese. I tasted it and I thought, it rocked my world. At that moment in time, that would have been my desert island cheese, because that's when I realized that fresh chev was not like, that could be just as special as a cheese that's aged in the mountains of France for a year and a half. Now, speaking of mountains in France, although American cheese is my first love, there is a cheese called Comté, C-O-M-T-E, that I think is absolutely spectacular. I love Comté, and it tastes great just by itself. It melts really well. You know, and so that would be a cheese I could consider. And then on this side of the Atlantic, I know I'm saying more than one, but you know, I have to. Oh my gosh, on this side of the Atlantic there are about 1 million. But if I was staying with that style of cheese, there are actually two. One is made in Vermont, and it's a new-ish cheese by a wonderful place called Jasper Hill, Cellars at Jasper Hill, and Jasper Hill Farm. They're kind of the same. What the Cellars is, they blasted out a cave in their mountain, in their hill, really, in Vermont, to create cheese aging caves, and they not only age their own cheese that they make there on the farm, but they also age other people in the regions. Very small cheesemakers. So it's a unique model in the U.S. And what it does is it allows them to not only make the local cheeses, some of them, you know, really make them better because those cheesemakers might not know how, but it also allows those cheesemakers to find a market because they don't have the distribution capabilities that Jasper Hill does. So what they do is they age those cheeses, and so they make so they have this cheese that they make themselves that Jasper Hill makes called Alpha Tolman. It's named after, I don't know, somebody in their region. ALPHA and then TOLMAN. It's a delicious Alpine style cheese that, I'm telling you, get your hands on it, it's worth it. But then the other domestic cheese that that I love is made in Wisconsin, and it's a cheese called Pleasant Ridge Reserve, and it too is an Alpine style cheese. It's modeled after a cheese from France called Beaufort, Beaufort, and Pleasant Ridge Reserve it's a model of cheese making. It represents so much because it's cheese that is made only from spring to fall when the cows are out on pasture. They do rotational grazing, which means that the cows are moved from different paddocks as the cows eat the grass. It gets down to a level where the cheesemaker thinks that the grass is not really feeding the cow the nutrients that it should to make for the best milk and therefore the best cheese. So then they move the cows on, let the grass go back. So it's a model of sustainability as well. And what happens is the milk is so fantastic, and the cheese, of course, is too, because of how good the milk is. And it's all really healthy and healthful for the cows and for the land and ultimately for us. And it's a magnificent cheese. I mean, I can't say enough about it.
Well, awesome. I think that's a great way to tie up our conversation today. I really appreciate you coming out to visit us here at Google today, and everyone in the cafe who got to eat lunch and try your delicious recipes, and thank everyone here for coming to listen to our talk today. And it was really nice seeing you again.
Yeah,
and,
you too, Jason.
enjoy the rest
Thank you.
of your day.
I will. I really will. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Yeah.